The world didn't end with an explosion or firestorm. It ended in silence. From the moment the last satellite blinked out of orbit, everything changed. Cities once alive with traffic, laughter, and light became shadows of themselves. Roads cracked. Houses sat hollow. Screens flickered with static. And then came the silence, the kind that pressed against the ears and tightened the chest. That's when the dead rose. Deep inside what used to be the northern edge of Colorado, in a region that had escaped most of the initial chaos, a group of survivors huddled in a structure that had once been a government research facility. 50 people. That's all that remained inside what they called Outpost Ember. Claire Jennings stood at the observation window, her hands clasped behind her back, scanning the tree line. Once a geologist, she had found herself thrust into leadership after most of the trained personnel had either vanished or never returned from scavenging missions. Her eyes were calm but alert, like someone always calculating, always ready. Behind her, the morning briefing had already started. Generator fuel's low. 3 days if we ration, said Marcus, a former auto mechanic who had become their unofficial engineer. We can't go into town again, muttered Lenora, a quiet teacher who had found her voice during the chaos. Not after what happened last time. Claire turned. We may not have a choice. If the lights go out, the fence goes down. And if that happens, we're not just out of power, we're out of time. Everyone in the room stiffened. The fence. It was the only thing that separated them from the infected. Tall, rigged with motion detectors and rigged lighting, it was more a symbol of hope than a real deterrent, but so far, it had held. And in this world, that was enough. Outpost Ember had been discovered by accident. A group of strangers had stumbled across the sealed gates while fleeing a city overrun. Inside, they found emergency supplies, communications equipment, and reinforced walls. No one knew what the facility had been for, but it had become a beacon for others. Over time, more people arrived. Families. Veterans. A few teens who'd lost their parents. 50 in all. But now they were reaching a breaking point. Jason, the youngest in the group at 17, spoke up. If someone has to go, I'll volunteer. A few heads turned. Jason was brave, maybe too brave. He had been orphaned during the early weeks of the outbreak and had taken every risk since like he had nothing to lose. No, Claire said firmly. No one goes alone. And no one under 18 leaves this compound again. That's non-negotiable. But we need supplies, argued Thomas, a nurse who'd seen too many people die. We need medicine. Clean water filters. And we need fuel before this place turns into a coffin. Claire nodded. That's why we're forming a team. 5 people. In and out. No detours, no extra risks. We stick to the map and come back before sunset. Outside, the wind picked up. A single branch snapped, falling to the forest floor. Everyone inside froze. Sometimes, the infected came in waves. Sometimes, they didn't come for days. But no one ever got used to that noise, the sound of movement where none should be. Later that evening, Claire sat alone in the armory, staring at the old wall map. Red markers showed where previous teams had gone and never returned. Yellow showed safe paths. Or at least, they had been safe. She drew a slow breath and marked a new line, a route to the solar facility on the other side of town. If they could reach it, they might be able to reconnect a power line and reduce dependence on fuel. Behind her, steps echoed. Marcus entered, holding a cracked radio. Signals coming in again. Faint but real. It's not automated. Claire raised an eyebrow. Another survivor? Maybe. Could be a trap. But it didn't sound like one. She took the radio and listened. Static crackled, then a whisper of a voice. To any survivors, northwest quadrant, shelter intact. Repeat, we have light. Claire's pulse quickened. Light meant power. Power meant security. And the fact someone was broadcasting it meant people still fought. Still held out. She glanced back at Marcus. We find them after the fuel run. If there's really a safe zone, we'll need to make contact. As night fell, the outpost remained lit by flickering bulbs and the distant hum of machines barely holding on. Children whispered stories in bunk beds, and guards took their positions with tense stares and quiet prayers. Outside, the wind carried the dry scent of dust and something else, something rotting, something waiting. But within those walls, 50 hearts still beat. And not one of them intended to stop. End of Part 1. The night passed slowly inside Outpost Ember. Even with the perimeter lights flickering, few dared sleep. Those who could did so lightly, one eye always half open. The rest lay awake, staring at concrete ceilings or quietly listening to the hum of generators and the distant creaks of wind brushing the steel gates. By first light, the team was assembled at the outpost's central hallway. Claire stood at the front, her voice calm but decisive. "We leave in 10 minutes. You all know the plan. Route 17 cuts across the outer farmland, passes through the back side of Ridgeview, and leads to the solar grid. We avoid downtown. We avoid the school. We don't take chances." The team nodded. Thomas, the nurse, carried the medical pack. His steady hands and sharp instincts had saved more lives than most would ever know. Riley, ex-park ranger, was the group's guide, a woman of few words but unmatched awareness of terrain. Mateo, once a delivery driver, now the team's logistics man, carried the toolkit and maps. What he lacked in combat experience, he made up for in quick thinking and a surprisingly steady hand under pressure. And rounding out the team was Hector, a construction foreman turned perimeter defense lead. His strength and calm presence made him their foundation. "Radio checks every 20 minutes, Claire said. "If we miss 2, we assume trouble." Jason, still annoyed he hadn't been chosen, stood by the outpost gates holding a clipboard, eyes narrowed with frustration. "Be careful out there," he muttered to no one in particular. The outer gates opened with a slow groan. The cold air greeted them like a warning. Trees stood still, silent witnesses to the world's collapse. No movement. No birds. Just the team and the road ahead. They moved swiftly, their boots crunching on gravel paths and broken asphalt. Old farms now sat abandoned, their fences torn, barns half collapsed. The silence was oppressive, the kind that made even breathing feel like a threat. By the time they reached Ridgeview's outskirts, the group paused. Riley raised a hand. Her eyes locked on a flicker of movement near an overturned car. Everyone dropped low. Claire whispered, "What do you see?" Riley pointed. "Just one. I think. Walking slow. Could be stuck." From a distance, it was hard to tell the difference between a scavenger, a turned one, or someone simply trying to survive. The figure dragged a foot, arms limp by its sides. Its head lolled unnaturally. Claire's voice was firm. "We don't engage unless necessary." Dieter left. Through the alley. They slipped around the silent threat, hearts racing but footsteps controlled. 20 more minutes and they reached the outer gate of the old Ridgeview solar facility. The building looked mostly intact, though vines had begun to climb its walls. Claire approached the side panel, where a keypad flickered dimly. Mateo quickly got to work. "Battery backups might still be charging. If this thing's drawing even partial sunlight, we could get power flowing again." Inside, the facility was dusty but surprisingly untouched. No signs of panic here. No broken glass. Just silence and faded signs about energy usage and green futures. Thomas moved to check the storerooms while Hector secured the rear doors. Suddenly, static cracked through the walkie-talkie. Claire snatched it from her side. "Ember Base, come in." A familiar voice responded, "Marcus. We've got motion on the eastern fence. 3, maybe 4. They haven't spotted the weak point, but they're close." Claire's voice dropped. "Do not engage unless they breach. We'll finish here fast." Mateo cheered softly. "Got it. Power's rerouting. It's not full capacity, but if we patch this line back, we could get backup power to the outpost for weeks, maybe longer." But Riley's voice interrupted. "We've got company." Inside. All eyes turned. From the far corridor came footsteps, slow, dragging. Not loud, but unmistakable. And they weren't alone. Claire grabbed the flashlight from her vest and pointed it down the hall. Stay calm. No noise. 3 figures appeared. But these weren't like the one from earlier. These were survivors. A woman stepped forward, hands raised. She looked worn down, face smudged with dirt and dried leaves in her tangled hair. We're not infected, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Please. We've been hiding here for days. Claire didn't lower her guard. Where's the rest of your group? The woman shook her head. Gone. It's just us now. We kept the place running. Figured someone would come eventually. Mateo looked at Claire. If they'd been keeping the solar grid going, maybe they're the ones who sent that radio signal. Claire nodded. We'll take them back with us. If this place holds potential, we'll return. As they began their journey back to Ember, 3 unexpected survivors joined their line. Proof that the world hadn't entirely fallen. Not yet. But none of them noticed the shadow that slipped behind the old solar tower, watching silently, waiting for night to fall. By the time the team returned to Outpost Ember, night was stretching across the hills like a dark tide. The perimeter lights flickered back to full strength, faint, but brighter than they'd been in weeks. The solar facility's temporary connection was holding. Claire breathed a cautious sigh of relief as the gates shut behind them. We'll reinforce the connection tomorrow. For now, we survived the night. Jason rushed forward as the group entered. You made it! His eyes flicked to the 3 unfamiliar faces behind them. Who are they? Claire gestured for calm. Survivors. They'd been hiding in the solar facility. Help keep it running. We wouldn't have made the repairs without them. The newcomers, a woman named Erin, her younger brother Micah, and an older man who had barely spoken a word, looked around the outpost cautiously, like people stepping into a dream they weren't sure was real. They'll stay in quarantine room A for 2 days, Claire added. Standard protocol. Marcus, who had been overseeing communications, waved her over. You need to hear this, he said, leading her into the comms room. A small speaker played back a recorded signal, static, then a clear voice, male, calm, steady. This is Haven Reach. If you're alive and hearing this, we have food, light, clean water. We are north of the Divide River, behind the wind farms. Transmission ends. Repeat. Claire frowned. That's not the signal we heard before. Marcus nodded. It started just after you left. It's been repeating every hour. Same voice? Yes. Claire crossed her arms. Then this is organized. Someone's trying to reach survivors. Thomas stepped in behind them. It could be real, or a trap. Bait, maybe. People follow the light, and someone's waiting. Still, Claire said slowly, we can't ignore it. If there's another stronghold out there, it changes everything. Later that night, Claire sat at her bunk, going over her notes. She couldn't sleep. None of them truly did anymore. Outpost Ember was secure, for now, but she'd felt something watching them near the solar station. That kind of instinct didn't go away. She flipped through her journal, a leather-bound notebook she'd taken from the abandoned school library 2 months ago. It was filled with handwritten maps, survivor names, timelines of events. Evidence that the world, though changed, still had threads of order left. The door creaked open behind her. It was Riley. I've been thinking, Riley said softly, about that signal. I don't think it's a trap. Claire looked up. Why not? Because I used to work near the wind farms. The location matches a real site. It used to be a research station. Remote, but well-stocked. They could have fortified it. Claire leaned forward. You're saying it might be real? Riley nodded. I say we scout it. Quiet. Just 2 or 3 people. If it's real, we gain allies. If it's not, we lose nothing. Before Claire could respond, an alarm echoed down the hallway, a long, low beep followed by red flashing lights. The perimeter had been breached. They ran. The entire outpost jumped into motion, guards rushed to their posts, children ushered into safe rooms, lights powered to maximum intensity. Marcus met them at the security center. Motion on the west fence. Not the usual shambling kind. Fast. Focused. Claire stared at the monitor. Blurry figures darted in and out of view, too quick to be the infected they were used to. Jason's voice came from behind. They don't move like zombies. Hector joined, his face grim. It's them again. Claire turned. What do you mean? 3 nights ago, I saw one like this. Studying the fence. Watching. Then gone. I didn't say anything because I thought it was in my head. Claire's stomach tightened. You think they're evolving? No, Hector said, voice firm. I think someone's controlling them. The word hit like a cold slap. Control. That wasn't part of what they'd prepared for. Zombies, the infected, were dangerous, yes. But they were instinctual. Unthinking. Predictable. If someone was learning how to direct them. Claire stepped away from the screen. Double all watch rotations. No one goes out tomorrow. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. As the team responded to her orders, she glanced once more at the monitor. The shadows beyond the fence had disappeared again. In the silent hours that followed, everyone remained tense. The newcomers stayed isolated. The outpost buzzed with uneasy questions. Claire stood on the wall alone just before dawn, scanning the dark horizon. Her hand hovered over the radio. This is Outpost Ember, she whispered into the mic. To anyone listening, we've received your signal. If you're real, we're coming. Morning brought no relief. The air outside Outpost Ember felt heavier, as if the ground itself knew what had happened the night before. The west fence, still intact, bore faint scratches and impressions in the dirt. Tracks. Not of wild animals, and not of the usual infected. These had a pattern. Direction. Purpose. Claire stood at the fence with Hector, studying the marks. What kind of zombie walks in a straight line, avoids the motion lights, and never touches the perimeter? None I've ever seen, Hector muttered. That's what worries me. Claire didn't respond. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on the signal from Haven Reach. If someone was really organizing defenses, if another stronghold existed beyond the Divide River, they needed to know. Ember couldn't stand alone forever. Back in the briefing room, the decision had already been made. We'll send a team to investigate, Claire announced to the gathered group. 3 people, no more. Fast, quiet, careful. Jason, who had grown more persistent since being left out of the last mission, stood. I want to go. I know how to move through the trees. I've scouted further than anyone here. No, Claire said without hesitation. You're still underage. I'm 17. He shot back. You said yourself this mission is about speed and caution. I can do that. Claire studied him for a long moment. Jason had changed over the last few months. The quiet teenager now walked with purpose, his eyes older than they should have been. She glanced at Riley and Thomas. Riley nodded. He's ready, Thomas added. We'll keep him in the middle of the formation. If things go wrong, we bring him home. Claire exhaled. Fine. Riley leads. Thomas, you're second. Jason, you follow every order, no exceptions. The 3 packed light. Enough food for 2 days. Water. First aid. 1 flare each. No radios, they'd be too risky that far out, with so many unknowns. Instead, they'd use timed return protocols. If they didn't return in 48 hours, Claire would assume the worst. Before they left, Jason visited the edge of the camp where Erin, one of the rescued survivors, sat on a bench with her brother. Be careful out there, she said quietly. We heard the infected howl last night. Something felt wrong. Jason forced a smile. We've all felt that for a long time. The gate opened, and the trio slipped into the woods. They moved like shadows, skirting the known infected zones, passing through overgrown backroads and long-forgotten neighborhoods now buried under vines and silence. The journey to the wind farms would take a day, if they stayed on course. But even the roads had changed since the collapse. Around noon, they passed through an old industrial park, rusted fences, collapsed warehouses, and graffiti-covered walls that whispered messages from survivors long gone. Most said the same thing. Don't trust the quiet. They pressed on, avoiding a collapsed bridge and taking a longer route around a dry creek bed. Riley stopped often, checking wind direction, listening for sounds. Her senses were fine-tuned. She could tell when the air shifted unnaturally or when the trees held more silence than they should. Near dusk, they found a spot to rest, an abandoned ranger tower still standing. Climbing to the top, they overlooked the valley below. And in the far distance, against the fading sunlight, stood the silhouette of the wind farms. Just beyond them, smoke. Thin, controlled. Not wildfire. Campfire. Jason pointed. That has to be them. Thomas frowned. It's too exposed. Could be a decoy. Riley scanned the area with her binoculars. We'll move closer at first light. Stay off the ridge. If it's real, we'll know soon enough. That night, they took turns on watch. Jason barely slept. He kept thinking of Claire's words, about how Outpost Ember wouldn't last forever. And he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Just before dawn, as the sky turned pale, Riley shook them awake. Movement. West slope. One figure. It's not one of ours. They dropped into a defensive crouch behind brush. Riley raised the binoculars again. It's human. I think. Wearing gear. Not stumbling. Watching us. Jason peeked through a gap in the trees and locked eyes, briefly, with a figure standing perfectly still. Black jacket. Clean boots. And a pair of binoculars pointed right back at them. Then the figure turned and vanished. Thomas whispered. That wasn't an infected. Riley nodded. No. That was a scout. Jason's heart pounded. They're watching us. Just like they watched the outpost. Riley pulled her hood tighter. Then we stay off the roads. Whatever Haven reaches, friendly or not, they already know we're coming. The morning sun barely pierced the thick canopy overhead as Riley, Jason, and Thomas navigated the ridge line above the wind farms. From this distance, the towers looked like sleeping giants, their white blades still in the calm air, their bases shadowed by makeshift fencing and what appeared to be watchposts. Jason whispered, That's not abandoned. Riley nodded, crouching behind a boulder. And it's not a normal survivor camp either. Look at the fences, steel reinforcement, electric wiring. Organized. Thomas adjusted his binoculars. I see at least 6 people patrolling. They've got real equipment. Radios, body armor. That's military grade. Jason narrowed his eyes. Then why aren't they answering our signal? They watched in silence for over an hour, taking notes, mapping the area, tracking guard rotations. At exactly noon, one of the wind turbines slowly turned, powered not by the wind, but by a hum deep underground. A backup generator, maybe? The smoke Jason had seen the day before drifted again from a chimney near a long building marked with a faded emblem, a triangle with a circle in the center. Thomas lowered his binoculars slowly. That symbol. I've seen it before. It was on a convoy that passed through Ember's region early in the outbreak. People said it was part of a private defense contractor that turned rogue after the collapse. They stopped taking orders. Started doing their own thing. Riley exhaled slowly. If this is Haven Reach, they're not just survivors. They're building something. Maybe even controlling something. Jason frowned. You think they're the ones sending the smarter infected to our fence? No one answered. Instead, Riley said, We get closer. Carefully. If they're friendly, we talk. If not, we get proof and we get out. They circled around, finding an overgrown path that led down toward an old substation behind the main compound. There, tucked under brush and debris, they found a broken camera system, long cables stretched from it toward the main camp. They're watching this whole region, Thomas murmured. No wonder they didn't walk into our signal. They already knew where we were. As they approached the substation, Jason suddenly froze. His hand shot up. Voices. Not loud. Calm. Coming from the far side of the fencing. They dropped flat behind a collapsed wall. Riley risked a peek. Two people stood on the other side of the fence, both in black jackets with the same triangle circle insignia. One was older, tall, with a commanding presence. The other was younger, holding a small tablet. "They've made contact," the older man said. "The Ember Outpost is real. They're organized, but underpowered." The younger one nodded. "Then it's time. Phase 1 is already working. The herd near their west fence was guided into the blind spot last night. If they hold, they could be useful. If not, the herd cleans up the problem." Jason's heart dropped. They weren't allies. They were testing Ember. Using the infected like weapons. Riley motioned to back away, but it was too late. A quiet beep sounded behind them. Jason turned. A small sensor, half buried in the dirt, blinked red. The fence lights turned on, floodlights bathing the substation in harsh white. "Run!" Riley shouted. They dashed back through the trees as alarms blared from Haven Reach. Voices shouted. Boots hit the ground. Distant, but closing fast. Gunfire cracked through the forest. Warning shots at first, then sharper, closer. They didn't return fire. There was no point. "We head for the creek," Riley shouted. "They won't track us underwater." Jason and Thomas followed without question. They dove into the narrow stream that ran beneath a collapsed logging road and crawled through the water, using reeds and debris for cover. Behind them, the pursuit continued, but eventually, the shouting faded. By nightfall, the trio emerged into the clear again, soaked, cold, and exhausted. "We can't go back the way we came," Thomas said. "They'll be watching that route now." Jason nodded. "Then we take the long way. And we bring this truth home." Riley looked back once, toward the glowing horizon behind them. "They're not a safe haven. They're building something, and they're testing us like we're part of an experiment." Thomas pulled out a waterlogged notebook, pages half ruined but readable. "We've got names, faces, patrol times, radio frequencies. Enough to warn Ember." Riley nodded, her voice low but sure. "Then we make it back. Whatever it takes." As they disappeared into the dark forest, behind them the wind turbines of Haven Reach began to spin again, not by wind, but by design. Whatever was coming next, it had already begun. It was nearly midnight when the lookout spotted movement at the eastern tree line. Claire stood at the top of the watchtower, rifle slung across her back, heart pounding. A voice crackled through her walkie. 3 figures. Coming in slow. Not infected. Claire didn't hesitate. "Open the gate, but only once they're within 20 feet. Full scan. Be ready." Moments later, the worn metal gate groaned open. Riley emerged first, soaked and limping slightly. Thomas followed, helping Jason, who looked pale and worn down but still alive. As they crossed the threshold, the gate slammed shut behind them. Claire ran to them. "You made it," she breathed, her voice tight. "What happened?" Inside the debriefing room, the mood turned grim. Riley wasted no time. "Haven Reach isn't what we thought. It's not a sanctuary. It's a facility, organized, armed, and watching us." Thomas pulled out his notebook, now dried by hand over a heater. "They'd been using the infected. Hurting them. Controlling their paths. We overheard a conversation. They sent that pack to test our defenses." Claire's eyes darkened. "So the breach at the west fence. Deliberate," Riley finished. "We're not just surviving out here, Claire. We're part of a larger game. And they're watching every move we make." Jason looked at her with something between fear and resolve. "They have scouts. Cameras. They knew we were coming before we even got close." The room went still. Claire sat back in her chair, trying to process it all. Haven Reach had been a symbol of hope. A possibility. But now, it was a looming threat, more dangerous than the undead themselves. She stood and faced her inner circle. Marcus, Hector, Riley, Thomas, Jason, Aaron, who'd asked to join them for the meeting, listened in silence from the corner. "We need to make some decisions, and fast," Claire said. "If they're testing us, it means they haven't made up their minds yet. Maybe they think we can be useful. Maybe they're planning to eliminate us if we're not." Hector folded his arms. "You thinking about running?" Claire shook her head. "No. Ember is our home. We stand here. But we need to change the way we operate," Marcus chimed in. "We've got weak points along the fence. The solar power won't hold under another large wave." Claire turned to him. "You and Aaron focus on reinforcing the perimeter. Tripwires. Non-electric barriers. Anything that slows them down without draining power." "Understood." She looked at Riley. "You'll take the lead on patrol training. Everyone who can walk learns how to scout, quietly and effectively. If they come again, I want them to regret it." Thomas added. "We'll need escape plans. Caches in the woods? Alternate routes." "Do it," Claire said. "I want this place invisible by next week." Jason, quietly sitting with a cup of water in his hands, finally spoke. "What if they send someone inside next time? Not just zombies, a person?" The room went silent again. Claire nodded slowly. "Then we find them first." That night, Ember didn't sleep. The survivors worked through the dark, reinforcing walls, setting up camouflage nets, burying emergency supplies outside the gates. What had once been a hopeful stronghold was now transforming into a fortress built on suspicion and necessity. But the enemy wasn't waiting. The next day, Riley found something near the east perimeter, a piece of fabric caught on a broken tree branch. Black. Tactical. Claire examined it. Too clean to be from the infected. This was recent. Jason stood beside her, clutching his weapon tight. "They're scouting us. Just like we scouted them." "We're out of time," Claire muttered. "Whatever they're planning, it's already started." By evening, another unexpected event shifted the camp's rhythm. Aaron, the quiet survivor from the solar station, approached Claire. "I know that symbol," she said, holding out a crude sketch of the triangle circle emblem. "Before the collapse, I worked in logistics. That company, Axiom Protocol. They were private security, but secretive. Funded by something deep-pocketed." Claire looked at her carefully. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Because I didn't remember. Not until you mentioned the word control. Then it came back. They were running simulations. Studying how panic spreads, how populations react." Jason stared. "You think this is still part of a simulation?" "No," Aaron said. "I think the world fell apart, and someone decided to use it as a live experiment." Claire stepped away, her voice low. "Then we're rats in a maze." "No," Riley said from the shadows. "We're lions in a cage. And it's time to break out." As night fell again, Claire climbed to the watchtower and looked beyond the trees, toward where Haven Reach's turbines silently turned in the distance. The war was no longer just against the undead. The real enemy was human. End of Part 6, 795 words. It started with silence. No alarms. No howls in the dark. Just a cold, clear morning and a decision that could change everything. Claire stood at the center of Outpost Ember, surrounded by her team. Riley, Thomas, Jason, Hector, Aaron, each of them wore the hardened look of people who had lost too much, but weren't ready to give up. "This isn't just about survival anymore," Claire said. "We're not waiting for the next wave. We're not going to let them study us like lab rats. We hit them first." No one disagreed. Over the next 2 days, Ember transformed from a reactive defense post into a planning ground for an offensive strike. They weren't going to storm Haven Reach. That would be suicide. But they didn't need to. Not yet. Instead, they focused on sabotage. Jason, with his smaller frame and natural agility, would lead a covert team to one of the satellite relay stations they'd mapped during the scouting mission, a small outpost less than 4 kilometers from the main Haven compound. It was used to monitor infected herds and relay video back to their command center. If we can knock it offline, Thomas said, we cut off one of their eyes. Maybe more. Hector and Aaron spent long hours fashioning EMP grenades from salvaged equipment, devices strong enough to fry short-range electronics but low-yield enough not to set off explosives or call in a full-scale attack. On the night of the mission, Jason sat beside the fire pit, staring at the glowing embers. Claire sat next to him. "You sure about this?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "You trusted me before. I won't mess this up." Claire offered a small smile. "You've grown more in 3 months than some people do in a lifetime." "Because we don't get a lifetime anymore," he said simply. By midnight, Jason, Riley, and 2 others, Tessa and Finn, crept through the dark toward the relay station. It was perched atop a concrete tower, surrounded by a perimeter fence and guarded by only 2 men. Their strategy was simple: go in silent, disable the equipment, and leave a message. Something that told Haven Reach that Ember wasn't afraid. They reached the perimeter just after 2 a.m. Riley gave the signal. Jason slipped under the outer wire first, then rolled silently across the gravel. One of the guards paced near the door, yawning. Jason froze, waited, then advanced again. Within 5 minutes, the team had taken down both guards using non-lethal force, zip ties, tape, and a fast-moving Tessa who knew how to use pressure points like a pro. Inside, Finn set up the EMP charges while Riley installed a timed beacon, a flare that would fire skyward once the blast triggered, bright enough to be seen from miles away. As Finn armed the final grenade, Jason pulled a small metal tag from his pocket. It bore the Ember symbol, a rising sun above a fortified wall. He taped it to the monitor. "This is for the people you thought were weak," he whispered. They slipped out into the dark just as the first light of dawn touched the clouds. Then, a soft pop, followed by a flicker of blue light from inside the tower. Seconds later, a blazing red flare burst upward, painting the sky. Back at Outpost Ember, Claire watched it from the tower. The camp cheered, not wildly, but with a quiet, fierce energy. They had hit back. But they knew retaliation was coming. By noon, drones circled above Ember. Silent. Watching. The message had landed. Riley returned with the team by afternoon, tired but proud. "You should have seen Jason," she said. "Moved like he'd done this 100 times. Jason just nodded and headed for water and rest. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by the weight of what they'd just done. Claire gathered the team once more. "That was a message," she said. "But now, we prepare for theirs." Aaron stepped forward, holding a diagram of Haven's known defenses. "If they hit back, it'll be with precision. A small team first, to test our response. Then the infected. Then overwhelming force." "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. "We split the camp," Claire said. "Not in weakness, in strategy. Half of us will stay here and fortify. The rest will go north, to the mountain caves. If Ember falls, the others survive." Jason stood, eyes clear. "Then let me lead the northern team. I know the routes." Claire hesitated, then nodded. "You've earned it." They had made their first move. Now they waited for the enemy's response. But for the first time in weeks, Ember felt strong. Not because they were safe, but because they'd stopped hiding. End of Part 7, 795 words. Let me know when you're ready for Part 8, the final chapter, where Ember stands its ground as the final assault begins, and the future of humanity hinges on the actions of 50 brave souls. Dawn broke in shades of blood orange and ash gray. Outpost Ember was silent, its walls fortified, its people hidden and armed. The air was thick, not just with fog, but with something heavier, tension, dread, and a strange calm that comes before a final battle. Claire stood in the watchtower, scanning the tree line. Behind her, Ember had changed. Tunnels led to escape routes. Emergency stashes were buried. Traps lined the outskirts, quiet snares, not loud explosives. They didn't want a firefight. They wanted survival. The drone that had hovered the day before didn't return. Instead, silence hung like a warning. Then, just after sunrise, movement. They came in black uniforms, 10 of them, no insignias. Tactical. Quiet. Professional. Claire whispered into the comms. Eyes on. Phase 1 confirmed. All teams hold position. The intruders moved like shadows, cutting through the trees, scanning the terrain. One paused by the east barrier, eyes on a broken trap wire. Claire recognized him. He was one of the 2 men they'd seen at Haven Reach. The one who had said, "If they hold, they're useful. If not." He was here now. Testing them again. Claire raised her rifle, but didn't shoot. She waited. Inside the camp, Hector, Aaron, and Marcus moved silently between positions, watching from slits in the walls, waiting for Claire's command. In the mountains, Jason led the secondary group to the caves. They weren't just evacuees. They were Ember's second strike, ready to return if the camp survived the first wave. But then the real horror began. From the far edge of the forest, the infected appeared, dozens at first, then hundreds. Not random. Not wandering. Directed. The tactical team fell back, not retreating, but positioning. They knew what was coming. They were letting the infected do their work. Claire's voice broke the calm silence. Phase 2 confirmed. Begin fallback plan. But Marcus didn't move. He stood at the west tower, eyes fixed on the wave of death approaching. I'm staying, he said. I've been running my whole life. Not today. Claire gritted her teeth. That's not the plan. Marcus smiled, calm. Plans change. He radioed into the secondary tower. Hector, get the trigger ready. The west path was littered with mines, buried deep under fake grass. Claire had hoped not to use them. But Marcus made the call. When the horde hit the 100-meter mark, Marcus gave a nod and fired a single flare. Boom. The field exploded in fire and smoke. Bodies flew. Trees shattered. A dozen infected dropped in seconds. But the rest kept coming. Inside Ember, panic threatened to spread. Aaron moved fast, rallying the younger fighters. Aim for the knees! Slow them down! Claire moved to the main gate, rifle tight in her hands. No one falls alone, she called out. The infected hit the wall like a tidal wave, shrieking, clawing, driven by something unnatural. Claire fired. So did Aaron. So did Hector. But then, behind the infected, more figures appeared. The black-clad soldiers. Only now they were helping the undead, directing them, moving among them, untouched. Riley cursed. They've modified them. They're using scent masking. The infected can't smell them. Claire's eyes narrowed. Then we changed the smell. She grabbed a red canister and threw it over the wall. A mixture of blood, meat, and fire oil, the kind they'd used to bait herds away before. The infected turned, confused. Some turned back on the soldiers. Chaos erupted. The mass team opened fire, not on Ember, but on the infected suddenly turning on them. Claire saw her chance. Now! Open the south gate! Hector did, and from the forest behind Ember, Jason's strike team returned. Reinforcements. Hidden. Armed. They flanked the attackers from behind. The tide shifted. Inside Ember, the infected began to fall. The traps worked. The planning mattered. Marcus, still holding the tower, shouted triumphantly. They're breaking! Claire saw the lead enemy, the one with the cold eyes, retreat. Bleeding from his side. He gave a last look, then vanished into the trees. By noon, it was over. The infected were dead. The soldiers, either gone or captured. Claire walked through the battlefield. Riley limped beside her. Thomas was wounded, but alive. Aaron had saved 3 children by pulling them into a cellar mid-fight. They'd lost 5 people. But they were still standing. Later that evening, Claire stood before the Ember wall, staring at the ruined forest. The turbines of Haven Reach were still out there, still turning. They'll come again, Jason said beside her. Claire nodded. Then we'll be ready. Because we're not the last of the living. She looked back at her people, bruised, tired, bloody, but alive. We're the beginning of something new. And from the ashes of a world devoured by the dead, 50 brave souls reminded humanity how to fight. And how to hope. End of Part 8, 795 words. Let me know if you'd like a full YouTube description, thumbnail text ideas, or HD image prompts based on key scenes. Congratulations, you've just completed an epic survival series.